welcome to the 14th installment of Aaron Walker Art Talk. I'm Aaron Walker, and I'm again joined by Hannah Frankman. Hannah. Today, we're going to be talking about Death the Sublime. Hannah, why did you pick this one?
Obviously it caught my attention. There's a man holding a skull above his head. Like that's pretty visceral. It's an interesting piece. It's really aesthetically balanced and therefore alluring. And there's just, and I talked about this with your gator piece too, but there's just so much contrast. The man has beautiful biceps, which are just, it's flesh. So it's fleeting and humanizing. And in contrast to the starkness of a skull is really interesting. And again, like the painting, there's a cleanness to the painting. There's a simplicity to it with the color palette. And yet there's something very rough about the man. You just imagine that hair is greasy and disgusting. And the whole thing, it's just, it taps into that same place that the poetry of Ovid hits so beautifully. It's just this mythological, human, pagan almost place. It's really interesting to me.
For sure. I can see the parallels, right? So this is actually an Nagori Man, which is a subsection of Hinduism. And this is one of the more symbolic pieces that I've done, right? Because it's called Death the Sublime. And so to be as straightforward as possible when talking about symbolic things, it's literally an elevation of death into the sublime, right? Into this area above life. Though I also agree with your other points about the man's hair probably being greasy and it being a rather rough individual.
So what it symbolizes, is that symbolizing something that is meaningful to you? Or are you objectively looking at this person who has this, elevation of death to the sublime, but it's not necessarily representing anything that hits close to home for you personally? So
this could be, in a previous episode, I talked about another piece of mine called A Conversation with Death, which represents, really it's myself, but it could be any given man at a intimate, cafe, nightclub, whatever setting with death in a business suit, right? And in that episode,
I'm sorry, I didn't get that one. That sounds great.
Yeah, I'll have to send it to you. But
yes, please.
But it's the point of that, as I explained in a previous episode, was principally about classic representations of death as this robed figure with a scythe, and he's very menacing. And I don't think that that's necessarily the sort of relationship that one ought to have with death, right? And so instead I portray him as this man in business suit, and you're very intimate and something to contend with, but not something to be in constant strife or conflict with, right? And this painting is kind of a slightly different aspect, I think, about pushing death into the sublime, into this sort of heavenly category. Let's see. There are these monks, these Eastern Orthodox Christian monks, who focus on death. There's a cool Facebook page called Brother, We're Going to Die that focuses on them. And it's called that because there's a guy in these monasteries who walks around, and his only job is to remind the brothers that they're going to die. So he puts his hand on your shoulder and goes, "Brother, we're going to die." It's this sort of constant reminder that death is what awaits you, right? Of course, the purpose.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, the purpose of that religion. Well, okay, come on. Well, the purpose of that is that the way they put it is to die when you're alive, so that when you do literally die, you will live. Something to that effect, right?
Okay, we can talk more about that later, because I want to know more about this. But keep talking about the painting for now.
There's also a lot of punk rockers who are behind that scene. They have really awesome zines. But anyway. They are. There's a lot of punk rock.
No, I believe you.
But,
okay. No, go ahead.
No, please.
Okay. So I want to know, did this come from an actual reference photo, or did you Yes, it did?
Yes.
Do tell. Do tell.
Well, I mean, I'm not sure exactly about the source. I assume it's National Geographic, and I've seen it a lot on like Tumblr. But again, it's an Aghori Man, subsection of Hinduism. They smoke pot a lot, apparently.
Okay.
But they have like a really cool aesthetic, and so they're the subject of a lot of photography. But this particular one, again, he's holding a skull over his head. I can't offer any more backstory than that.
See, I thought for sure this was one that you like came up with. You compiled photos, which almost would have made it better. I don't actually mean that, but just like, you know, you're like, yeah, let me find like a picture of a skull, and let me like, I would just imagine it because I can't picture like manic painter Aaron, right? Like in your manic state, you're just like skull photos,
I just had, like, a picture
long greasy hair.
I swear, I sold this. I was trying to sell this at an art market once, and I had 3. And this is in New Orleans, so a lot of people are drunk when they walk up to you. But 3 different drunk dudes just go, "Hey man, I love Rob Zombie." And I was like, "Yes, for a certain amount of money, it will be Rob Zombie."
So, is the color palette that you chose reflective of the aesthetic of your subject photo?
Not really.
Okay. Then why did you choose it?
I mean, it kind of is. The original one is more cool gray tones, but it would have been really bland and I think less interesting to paint. And it would also be much more difficult to do. In this one, I chose somewhat realistic pinks and sort of flesh tones, but I really liked the way that these other like kind of highlight colors that I chose, and their names I am blanking on, but it's this like magenta and almost turquoise and aquamarine play with that flesh tone and with the background colors, which are great.
Okay. So I actually want to know more about this New Orleans art market, because that sounds like the kind of place where you go and you just like pretend to be Kerouac and you just like write a lot. Like, it sounds amazing. I don't know if it has an awesome aesthetic, but give me like the pitch that you would give. And maybe I'm not like understanding how like New Orleans art markets work correctly, but like, tell me what you'd tell me about this painting if you were trying to sell it to me. If I was like, if I was not one of the like stoned dudes who was like, oh man, like zombies.
Rob Zombie.
Yeah. But if I were just like, you know, dude, that's an awesome painting. Like what would you tell me about this painting? How would you sell it to me?
Probably go into, well, this is called Death to Sublime, and it's principally about the elevation of death to the sublime. Like, I'm really interested in that. I probably wouldn't go into the aside about the death-obsessed monks, but I would go into that it's a picture of an Nagori Man. The Aghori are heavily in their subsection of Hinduism that focuses principally on death. And typically around there is when I would get a question. Okay.
I feel like that's a prompt to ask you another question. I'm not going to follow. So tell me, this is my last question for you on this one, and then I'm going to save my last questions for our last episode. Just describe to me the New Orleans art market, please, because this sounds amazing. Like, I want to go.
Okay. So it's actually closed down now. It was called the Frenchmen Art Market, and it was somewhat famous, and you had to apply to get in, right? And so it was somewhat competitive, and it cost like $75 a night for the artist just to be there. So you had to actually sell things. The first night I was there, I sold $500. And so I was like, I don't know why I'm not always here, right? And it kind of went down after that. But it's really great. As the night goes on, it's in the French, right outside the French Quarter on a street called Frenchmen, obviously. And so you have a lot of people that think that it's like a museum or like a park. And so they will walk around and just stare blankly at the different art without buying anything. But then you also have a lot of intoxicated people, whether they're high on psychedelics or just drunk, and they come up and they're very fun to deal with. some more than others. But it's I really love the atmosphere. It was always really energetic, and there's just people, and you get to talk to them about your work and where they're from. People come from all around the globe to New Orleans, in part to see art. So I really enjoyed it. You can't go anymore if it's closed.
Why is it closed? That's awful.
Well, they had some business ethics problems that made a lot of people not want to be there. So for instance, if it rained, you had to still pay them. So these poor artists who don't have money, it wasn't great. Okay. But anyway, they ended up not being able to pay their rent anymore. And so they had to close down.
Okay. It sounds amazing though. I love it.
It was a lot of fun. One other thing, which we can talk about now, I think. Okay. No, actually, we'll save it for the next episode.
We'll save it for the next episode? Wait, what?
Thank you for coming on. I'll talk to you in the next episode.
hey, that's like unfair cliffhanger for me, let alone your listeners. Come on, I hope you're releasing these all at once.
I'll see you in the next episode. Bye-bye.
Okay, fine. Well, I'll be there now.